Patrick, thank you so much for meeting with me today. I really appreciate it. You have been in public life for most of your entire life. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey from the military to serving in Congress and now what you do on the news?
Yeah, well, Joe, it's good to be with you and appreciate having you on. I've been blessed, like, as the Bible says, having a servant's heart. And for me, that really started in the military. I followed my father and grandfather's service into the military. My grandfather served in the Pacific in the Navy in World War II.
Yeah.
My father served in the Navy during during Vietnam. But every generation gets better, which is why I went in the Army. So, but joining the Army at 19, it changed my life, or my commission as a U.S. Army officer. I wrote that I wanted to be an 82nd Airborne paratrooper when I was 19. It took me a few years, but I got there.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And but the Army, really honed my leadership skills, my discipline, and they cut me to school, law school. I went back in, taught at West Point. I was there though, Joe, when 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
Went to combat twice. And on the second deployment was the invasion of Iraq, and I had lost 19 men in my unit, which really propelled me into political public service. We used to have every 5 members of Congress, 4 were veterans. Now it's less than 1 out of every 5. So to me, to kind of fight for my brothers and sisters veterans, I thought was very important.
And you were the first sitting member of Congress who had served in the Gulf War. Is that correct?
In Iraq, yep.
In the Iraq,
in post 9/11 wars, in Iraq, Afghanistan. So for me, I kind of felt like a special responsibility to represent the over 2 million of us that served in Iraq, Afghanistan.
And then, you've continued to serve and be in the spotlight in a lot of ways. Why has it been important now in your career? You've been involved in news and really sharing information. How did that change come about for you in your life?
Yeah, listen, in college, I wrote a newspaper column. I was that effective, and to me, it's the fundamental principles of every soldier in our army is you got to shoot, you got to move, so you got to be fast, and you got to communicate, right? And so, for me, it's a natural, kind of extension of what I did in the military. But when I was at West Point as a young professor, I wrote a newspaper column called Murphy's Law. When I ran, though, for Congress, represented over 750,000 people.
Right.
There's 220 media markets in the country. Philadelphia media market, where Bucks County is in, is the 4th most expensive. So it's like $1 million a week. You have to earn media, right? And you have to get out there. And so for me, I learned, when you put $1 million a week on television, that's what really grabs people's attention.
That's interesting. And so, talk about the change in news, you think then. So you've been involved in this since really you were a congressman, and now it's almost 20 years later too. How do you think the news industry has changed? How do you think people understand it and receive it?
Well, it's much more diversified now, right? So before, it used to be 3 channels when I was younger, ABC, NBC, CBS, and now Fox. But now there's social media. Now there's a lot of other television networks, right? So for me, it boils back down to the leadership. And leadership is meeting people where they are. They're sometimes, if they're older, they're watching television still. But my kids, they're on their phones. They're watching Netflix on their phones. They're watching cable television on their phones. So that's they're watching their dad on their phone, right? They're getting my Instagram post and my Twitter account. Like, that's how they're seeing what hits I had, and they're commenting on it, which I also appreciate.
That's interesting. So where do you think our generation is still getting our news, and where do you think your kids are getting the news?
Well, our kids are just like most Americans. They're getting their news from their screens. Unfortunately, for far too many of them, they're getting it from TikTok. And I'm not on TikTok because I still have a top secret.
You're the last one.
But I will tell you, there's 170 million Americans that get their news from TikTok. I personally think it's dangerous, but I think it's, those 170 million Americans are unwittingly giving their data to China.
And is that why you think it's dangerous? Because where the data is going?
Yes. And I think the way they're using their algorithms, the way they're using, and the way they've gone after journalists that have talked badly about TikTok. So, it is what it is. I don't think China has our best interests at heart. Listen, I served in combat. I lost 19 men that I served with. Those of us who've seen war and have lost brothers and sisters, don't want to see another war, and I don't want to fight a war against China, but I'm not naive in that they feel like they have this manifest destiny that they're going to be the leader of the world, and they're going to do it by any means necessary. And by having strength through deterrence, I think that's really important for us as a nation.
How do you think the American people should be getting that message, though? Because the way we receive news today feels like completely different than 20 years ago. You know, being a print journalist for years and how we would actually be able to get that in front of people, that's not it. And I just feel like there's a different internet today than even the ones we grew up on. And the way things move and how quickly they move, and particularly the way misinformation moves. And I think that's what I'm really most worried about as a father too. I'm like, how do I help my kid understand what's going to be presented to him? What's going to be in front of him? How do you determine whether or not it's real? How do you determine whether or not you should prioritize it? And how do you actually process that?
Yeah, well, first off, we have to understand there's these outside influences in America. So our competitors, which I like to refer to as cringe, say it's China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and then extreme terrorists. The cringe element out there, I mean, they are spending tens of millions of dollars to divide America from within. So they're putting out there, especially on social media, the extreme far left and extreme far right, the hate groups, the KKK, the other organizations that are out there. And they're trying to divide America from within. And so for me, I understand my kids are going to see some of that stuff and not have the experience like I have, right? Because I've deployed overseas and lived overseas and
have been in news in some degree, or been in the news.
Been in the news. I spent years teaching constitutional law, West Point and stuff. So for me, to them, they know that they can always come to me and talk to me about it. We have conversations. It is very much when we're having dinner at the table, when we're driving, no phones, we're talking. And that includes me too, for the record, right? But we've had struggles. I mean, for me, my son did do so hot grades recently, and his phone was taken away, and it's a big deal.
You got to be a dad and do that, though, right?
Yeah, but I'm his dad, not his best friend, right? I mean, I like to be his friend, but that's not my job. So, he wasn't happy about it, but we had to come to Jesus about it and about his grades, and we had to move forward. But I remember a few years ago, word about Catholic family, right? And so, we go to church on Sundays. We pray before meals. We're very thankful and grateful. But I remember my son waking up at 1 o'clock in the morning once because he saw a YouTube video about the mark of the beast, and that is the world coming to an end, and that let him know,
that's hard.
And I was letting him know that you got to trust the process. You got to just be a good person. We're all put on this earth to make this world a better place. And that means it starts our own community, our own family, and for our country and beyond.
What does truth mean to you today, and especially in this media landscape?
Well, some people out there think that their opinion is true, and it might be true to them, but it doesn't make it the truth, right? Yeah. So if you're not reading things and going to different news sites, if you're just getting one version of things, you're doing yourself a disservice. And the whole point is about having the intellectual humility to learn from others. Some of those confident voices out there.
Yeah, I like that.
Some of those confident voices out there, I don't know what the hell they're talking about, right? So, and some of the networks I do work. So, but I've been through the ranks, and I've been through, and I just say ranks. I don't just mean the military. Being on television, spending tens of millions of dollars on it, being on the side where I'm a member of Congress asking tough questions. Yeah. Been there, getting the tough questions asked while I was helping run the Army, in budget committee hearings, et cetera. But also, understanding that, having my own national television show, what that means as a contributor for other shows, what that means, and how they want to spin and ask certain questions and give more latitude to their point of view than others.
It's interesting. I mean, You've had a show on MSNBC. You're a contributor on Fox News. You have a show on Yahoo Business. You have been in a number of traditional media roles. Who's your audience right now, and do you think you need to take steps to change that going forward?
I think my audience is really threefold. It's my fellow brother and sister veterans across America. There's 20 million of us out there. These entrepreneurs. So because I teach at the War and Business School, because I'm a venture capitalist, I've invested over $100 million in veteran companies, over 65 of them. And then, of course, my kids and my family, right? The 750,000 folks that I represent in Congress. I still live in my community. I'm still in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And to me, they're the ones that love my, Eagles, problems, etc.
That's right. Go Birds.
Yeah, go Birds. But to me, it's important that, and they're all somewhat different, but it's still about, how my view of the world and what I've seen or what I'm hearing, what I'm reading, and I push it out, and what I'm experiencing can help them or could affect them in their daily lives.
As a parent of two teenagers, what are you trying to do to be involved and make sure that they're getting the right information, but at the same time, not trying to overwhelm or kind of helicopter parent them too?
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, for kids, it's, or anyone out there, they can be what they see. So for veterans, for me, I was trying to show veterans they could, I was a U.S. Congressman in a very competitive district. I won my first race. I won again. I was one of the least wealthy members of Congress, but I tried to serve with distinction. Writing the Repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, being part of the Affordable Health Care Act, raising the minimum wage. Those things were personal to me, and that was important. Now in this chapter of my life, I'm an entrepreneur. I help run businesses. I help invest in people that are running businesses that I believe in. I want veterans to realize that they can be an entrepreneur and see some of these folks I get a chance to deal with at Wharton Business School, at Yahoo Finance, et cetera. So to me, that's important. And so by putting that out there on social media, by putting out there on, when I'm on live, and I try and mention my background when I'm on national television, I think it's important for them to see they can do whatever they put their mind to.
That's great. Do you think truth is valued differently today?
I think truth is valued differently, yes. And I think that's sad. And I think that's one of the reasons why people don't trust institutions. They don't trust governments. They don't trust corporations. They don't trust religious organizations like churches and synagogues. And I think it's not great. And I think part of that is because of the misinformation out there. And that's why I think it's important that leadership principle of you meet people where they are. When I was Captain Murphy with the 82nd Airborne Division, I was in formation before we ran, the 5 miles in the morning and push-ups and sit-ups, et cetera. When I was Congressman Murphy, I was putting newsletters out there. I was on social media. And listen, I evolved. When Twitter first came out, I was a freshman congressman. I was 33 years old. And I told my team, who said, you got to go on Twitter, you got on Twitter, now X, and I was like, I was a constitutional law professor. I'm not going on Twitter. I went at 146 characters at the time, right? But they were right, I was wrong. But I had to evolve, and I had to, have an open heart and open mind, and I eventually came through. And to me, though, that's why I'm on pretty much all the social media platforms except TikTok.
I found a grown-up dad because I felt unprepared and I wanted to be a different kind of father than I had growing up. Today, Grown Up Dad is a nationally broadcast TV show across PBS, and we're working directly with dads and experts around the world to share important stories and advice so we all find the joy and strength of being a father. Now, Grown Up Dad is a nonprofit. We operate from the generosity of viewers like you. So please hit that subscribe button and join our small Dad Collab groups. Go to that website, grab some merch, and together, let's make fatherhood better for everyone.
How do you have a conversation so often with people who you fundamentally disagree with? And how do you know when to engage?
Yeah, well, first, I love my country. I love America, right? And so my job is to communicate to the American people the values that I hold dear, that we hold dear as Americans. I think people, whether it's Fox News or MSNBC, get wrapped around a certain perspective and they got to argue and fight. And that's not my jam. My jam is, what am I going to do to let my kids know the values that America stands for? The values of peaceful responsibility, things such as strength, things such as values, freedom, justice. We're a great country because we're a good country. We're not perfect, but even our founding fathers knew we weren't perfect when they said, we the people in order to form a more perfect union. So why do I go on Fox News? Why don't I have the debates? Because I fundamentally disagree with some of the guests they have on, and I'm willing to go toe to toe with them. And I think my perspective needs to be heard. even if that audience might not agree with me. They need to hear the truth. They need to hear from someone who has seen blood, who has seen war, who has seen sacrifice, but more importantly, who believes in peace, who believes in an economy that needs to work for everybody, not just the wealthiest 1%.
And so with that, like, talk to me about like misinformation and media literacy is understanding, how do we get the right information to people who are not, it's just like, you want to put it in front of them. You want them to see it. You want them to read it and take it in and understand like the context of it too, because we are sometimes getting wrapped around that little bit of just that one opinion that we want to hear over and over and over again. The algorithm just feeds us over and over again too. How do we get that broader perspective, and how do we try to help each other make better decisions for the whole country and ourselves?
Yeah, I think it goes down to the fact you can't have a 14-point plan. You go in there, like, keep it simple. In the Army, you used to say, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. They're talking to me, right? And so if you do that and you let people know what it's about, like, people want to get involved. Like, I was on The Hit today and about what just happened, right? But you have to be able to step back and have that experience and have that perspective to let people know what's important and what they should be thinking about. And I think about, are you doing it in a way that's gracious? Even if you disagree with somebody, you could disagree without being disagreeable. You don't have to attack people personally.
Yeah.
And I think it far too often goes there. I don't think if you're a Republican that you're an evil person. We might disagree. My ex-wife is Republican, right? I mean, I have family members that are big Trump people, right? And I love them. I don't love them any less, right? I don't agree with them. They drive me crazy, right? But you know what? They have to have empathy to meet them where they are.
Right. Is teaching that something that's just a responsibility of parents? Like, is there a role too for schools or institutions or the church, or is it really like, hey, this is just on us?
Lottie, Dottie, everybody, right? Now, it starts with me, with my kids, right?
Yeah.
During a campaign, we just went through a contentious campaign, now President Trump won by, 1.5% in Pennsylvania. Bucks County was split. We live in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is, a split county and a swing state. And, I remember driving, and one time my daughter said, oh, it was a FUCK Trump sign, flag. And then a second later, and it was a FUCK Biden, right? And she didn't like the one going against then President Biden. And she said something pretty derogatory. And I go, Mags, like, her name's Maggie. I call Mags. I said, you can't let hate fill your heart. Like, don't talk about either way that, like, they have perspectives. I thought it was an obscenity. I don't want to see my community. It's not my next door neighbor or anything, but if it was, I would go and talk to them about taking it down. But you have to lead by example, and you have to show grace and humility. Secondly, as a leader, I might not be in Congress anymore. I might not be running the Army anymore, but I'm still a leader in my community and for my country and for my brothers and sister veterans. I'm the leader of my family. And I take that as an awesome responsibility to speak truth to power, to act and live my life with a conscience that's about everybody, not just for myself.
I really appreciate that, because it feels hard today to do that. Like, it's just easier to sit back and try to ignore, to let it pass you by and just kind of turn a blind eye to it the whole time. But I don't want, I'm worried about what is going to be fed to my son. I'm before he's the misinformation, and how does he find priorities, and how does he understand that there are people actively trying to manipulate him, and all of our kids now too. And I feel like, again, it's like a different internet. We're losing fact checking. We're losing the appreciation for just factual truth. And I want to know, like, how do I help him with that without, being on top of him all the time?
Yeah, and you can't be on top of him all the time.
Yeah.
You can't be a helicopter parent. But what you can say is, when things go bad, look to the helpers. When there's crisis going on, look who's going on TV and who's trying to unify America, not divide us. It is so easy to divide people. I can knock on the door and tell people, hey, my good friend Joe is running for Congress. Would you give him support? Okay, yeah, I'll consider it. If I went in there and said, hey, Joe is stealing your money, blah, blah, where is he? I want to get up. Like, you can rile people up. And, I know you would never do that, by the way. But, the media is very powerful, right? It's the fourth estate in America. We have the legislative branch, executive branch, judicial branch, but then we have the media that's really the referee to keep us all accountable. Because listen, we're supposed to have three co-equal branches of government. It's supposed to be like rocks, paper, scissors, but far too often these days, the Congress and the courts are letting the president run all over them.
Well, so your former colleagues, like, why can't we try to even keep up with this and the new technology? And it's frustrating. I want them to do their jobs better. I want there to be actually a little bit more protection for our kids. Like, why is this so hard to get through?
I mean, for far too often, we follow the money. I mean, the lobbyists, what TikTok is paying right now for lobbyists and the influence people in Washington, D.C. But let's be very clear. When I say look at the helpers, look at some veterans, look at Republican Tom Cotton. I disagree with Tom Cotton on a lot of things, but my man served in the 101st Airborne Division. I happen to be 82nd Airborne Division. He is, as a conservative Republican from Arkansas, has stood up. The President Trump said, hey, listen, this Congress passed the TikTok bill. We're not going to look the other way. This is a China propaganda tool for 170 million Americans that are now affected. We cannot allow any more to do it. I give him a lot of credit for that. So, and I want to call it out like I see it. When I do that, someone will say, oh, Murphy, you're Fox News. Why are you trying to butter up the Republicans?
Right.
Listen, I just shoot away. People are going to bash me in the far left, they're going to bash me in the far right. It doesn't matter. You know why? Because I'm for what's right for America. I'm what's right for my family, for my community, and my country.
We're talking about what this country does need. And it was interesting about how I feel like the discourse has made us feel so divided. And I'm wondering kind of about your background. I'm like, when you're in the military, you're put with people you've never met before. You're from all over the world and all over the country, all different backgrounds. Somehow you come together. You become, literally in the trenches and get each other's back. It's like, do we need some of that somehow?
No doubt. I think we should have a national call for service. Not everybody's serving in the military, but why not for the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, Teach for America? We should be having a standard that it's an expectation that young Americans should serve either after high school, college, or grad school, period. We don't have that. There's folks like Congressman Pat Ryan that are pushing that, and I'm supporting those type of efforts. I would say, though, this. I do think there's a lot of folks who want people to go in the foreign wars, that want, you hear some leaders in America say, let's go retake over Gaza. Let's go do this. And, whoa, when your generation served in Vietnam, you got 5 deferments. You're real quick to send sons and daughters to other people and not your own. So I am a reluctant warrior. I don't want to send my kids into harm's way, for other reasons. But if my 2 kids came to me and said, hey, Dad, I want to be a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division, or, God forbid they say I want to be a Marine, which we consider the JV team, I would support them 100%, my daughter and my son. I'd be so proud. But it's their life, and I'm not going to push them that way. But I just wish more folks did encourage people to serve, because it gives you a purpose-driven life.
Yeah. What gives you hope now? What are you hopeful for? What's bringing you joy in your life?
Well, listen, I have 2 great kids, right? So I'm personally blessed. We have a beautiful home on the water. We have health. I would say, you spend any time around these young Americans that serve our country, it's hard not to be inspired. I mean, they're wearing the cloth of our country. They're leaving places like West Point or, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, et cetera. And they're leaving these institutions with the love of country stamped on their heart. Folks who wear the uniform today, our generation of Iraq, Afghanistan veterans and the current generation, we're 44% people of color. We're more diverse than America. We're more likely to be independents than Democrat or Republican. We're more likely to vote in elections. We're more likely to be employed. We're more likely to be high school teachers or pastors in our churches. We're civic assets. But Joe, I'll tell you, on the other side of the coin, we're more likely to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Mental health is just as important as your physical health. There should be no stigma about going to see a counselor. It should be a common thing. We have lost over 150,000 troops since 9/11, at the longest wars in American history. Over 20 a day. And it has to stop. We have to let people know there's help out there, that you can make a difference. And it's not just a whole of government approach. Well, what's the VA doing? No, it's a whole nation approach. What are we doing in the public sector? Yeah, but in the private sector as well. And that's why, I chair this new initiative. It's called the Face to Fight, or, www.wefacetofight.org. It's a private sector, $80 million campaign. I let people know there's help out there and they can be part of the solution, even if they didn't serve.
That's really great. I think, lastly, do you think do you still think there's going to be a place for you on the air in 10 years? Do you think this is how people in the next generation are still going to be getting their news? And how do you help get the right facts to people 10 years from now?
Yeah, well, I think it's like the military, right? It's adapt and change, right? Every time I jumped out of a perfectly fine airplane, my parachute, sometimes I was going down real fast, and sometimes, I got caught. It was an easier ride. And sometimes it was at night, and sometimes I had, a combat bag with me. But I think at the end of the day, I will be out there fighting a good fight because I love my country. And I know the media is really important. I don't think it's going to be as curated with major networks as like it is now. And I think we're seeing, diversification on that. But we're also seeing a lot more folks that go to news sources that's going to complement what they already believe in. And I would say to my fellow Americans, read other things than beside what makes you feel good. Don't just go and get a confirmation bias, right? Go and have the humility, the intellectual humility to learn from other folks, even if you might disagree with them 90% of the time.
I like that. Patrick, thanks for what I was saying to you.
You too, man.
Thanks.